I feel like we're getting ready to go to war with Venezuela.
Yeah,
Do you think that's
definitely.
actually that
Yeah.
definitely we're
Okay,
definitely that's
well,
happening?
it looks like it. Okay, yeah. I mean, there's right. It's not from what I understand. We already have. I think there are 8 warships there, a submarine, and then 10 F-35s have been moved to Puerto Rico. Yeah, obviously in preparation for some kind of operation, or at least the appearance of of that. Maybe this is all bluff. Maybe this is just a way of creating pressure. But I wouldn't be surprised that if Donald Trump chooses to go ahead with some kind of military operation against Venezuela, against Maduro's government. There was also a report that the Marines were practicing landing, on the shores of Puerto Rico. And according to the report, this was a shore that was similar to the coastline of Venezuela. And so there may actually be a plan to put boots on the ground. I think I hear there may be 4,000 Marines that on those ships that could possibly be engaged in some sort of landing.
And this is supposed to be a regime change operation. Like, I mean, Pete Hegseth had this tweeted. I think it was just straight up. I think he said regime change. Like, we're standing
really?
by
Yeah.
waiting for Trump's order to do a regime
Yeah.
change, basically in
Oh,
Venezuela.
okay. Yeah. Well, that's basically. I mean, of course, it started with that $50 million bounty that was put on Maduro's head, and then I think there was something like a 10 million that was put on some, a general's head there or something. Yeah, I think that's what's going on.
Do you think that will be successful? Do you think we can actually get away with the regime change?
Well, it's unclear. We might, let's face it, we might. I don't want to say that, but it's possible. I don't, the idea that we could actually occupy the country and then impose the government on the Venezuelans and keep it there, I don't think we can do that. Venezuela is a large country, and I think a lot of them are armed. Again, they have militias. They have some, regular troops that are armed and waiting. And in general, from what I hear, I have never been to Venezuela, but just people are not going to respond kindly to, an American attack. It's going to, regardless of what they might think of the government or think of Maduro, they're going to fight. So it could be ugly, but we can, we have all these missiles, and I don't think they have any air defense to speak of. They could carry out a decapitation strike. They could, hit, various other, various decision-making centers and just create chaos within the country. And they might have, they have their Marines, and maybe they've prepared some of their own militias. I don't think it would amount to much. I don't think, again, they would really succeed in imposing their own order, but they could create chaos. And then we could have potentially something like, maybe this is a hope, like a Syria-like scenario where the country, okay, you don't get exactly who you want in charge. Well, maybe they did in Syria, but you have chaos. You have a weakened state. Why? I don't know, but that's maybe what they're after. But Venezuela is different. I don't think I know you don't have the same kind of like sectarian divisions that often, make a territory, a state vulnerable to, to that kind of outcome. There aren't these fissure lines in Venezuela, to my knowledge. I mean, the ones that exist are class. I think are class lines, and the great majority, of the lower classes, are favorable. Again, according to my own understanding, have a favorable attitude, do support Maduro and his government.
Yeah, and you said that Venezuela has no air defense that we know of. I imagine their military is far inferior technologically, but part of me is wondering, like, maybe that's not true, because I don't know what the deal is with China and its ability to export weapons. If China has very advanced weaponry, and we saw that on display during the military parade, we've seen some confirmation of their ability in aviation as well, with a little skirmish between Pakistan and India. That hey, these Chinese systems are good. They're their air defense and their aircraft.
Right. There's also
Could they?
been, yeah, I think fairly extensive cooperation between the Venezuelans and the Russians. The Russians have been there for a while, and I don't know exactly what they supplied to them. I heard just yesterday that they have supplied some of their Sukhoi, their more recent, more advanced aircraft. So that's something. And then I just saw a little report. I forgot about it earlier, but that they have some. They do have some anti-ship missiles. They have, I guess like the equivalent of a Coast Guard, but these Coast Guard vessels are actually equipped with anti-ship missiles. So remember, again, we're in a new age. Yeah, okay, America has a lot more firepower. America is a lot stronger overall. But remember what the Houthis did to the American Navy. And if they have, anti-ship missiles, they can wreak some real damage. And, who knows, maybe they do have some air defense. But just not to my knowledge.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows except the people that are in charge of the military in Venezuela and doing these deals. But there's that possibility. So we were always talking about the event if an aircraft or aircraft carrier or a big ship goes down. We're thinking like be in the Red Sea, the Iranians or the Houthis, but it might be here in Venezuela. And if that happens, oh, it's just going to be such a mess. I just don't think this is going to go the way that we think it's going to go. And I think one of the big reasons as well is that we can't succeed in regime changes because nobody likes us anymore. And a lot of this comes from what we're doing in Gaza. Before we used to be able to exploit, like you said, sectarian factions or whatever to help with the regime change. There was enough dissent. We were kind of cool that people would be like, yeah, maybe we should be with the Americans. But right now, I think it's clear that we're gross. We're tainted by our association with Israel and the genocide in Gaza, that we are being rejected globally by just everyday people. And I think the people in the Pentagon and political elites, they don't understand that. They don't understand how damaging Gaza has been to the West.
Yeah, well, clearly our soft power has suffered greatly, and that does make a difference. Again, it makes a difference on who would be, how much of the population would be willing to, actually accept an American imposed regime. Maybe in the past they had fairly large segments of population in Latin America and other parts of the world who were favorably disposed to the U.S. and just felt like, if the Americans give us something, let's just accept it. Because, they're just so much richer and they're so much better and, so on and so forth. And I think you'll find some of that in Venezuela, but probably a lot less than there might have been a decade or so ago. America's image has taken a real beating, and that does affect people's attitudes, and that has real world consequences, it makes regime change operations more difficult. No question about it.
Yeah, I mean, if we just take a look at what's happened globally, we look at countries that have tied themselves to the United States. Their politicians are suffering horribly. I don't know if you saw that the Prime Minister of Japan just resigned, Shiba, I think. And in a large part, it was because of his vassal status and mentality towards the United States, that he just accepted these harsh tariffs that were and promised like $440 billion in investment in the United States, and really Japan's getting nothing. And we see the same thing in Europe. We saw the same thing in South Korea. All these people that have tied their political careers to the United States are underwater now, or are being voted out. I mean, what Starmer's at 11%, Macron's unpopular. So, and the people that resist become more nationalistic. There's more pride. We see this in India. We see this in Iran, Brazil. That's where the force is. That's where the heart of the masses is resistance to the United States and support for Palestine. And so I just don't think we fully, our country, the people in charge have fully understood what has happened because of what we've done with to Gaza.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. We've paid a huge cost. Not as large a cost as Israel, but but a very large cost ourselves, for the genocide of the last nearly 2 years, no question about it.
Right. I feel like we could have gotten away with some of this stuff if Gaza wasn't happening, because we could still put on that air of moral authority, but that moral
Right,
authority is gone now, and I don't
right.
think you can reverse that. It's not. It can't come back now.
Yeah, no, it's certainly taken a beating, and I think you just also have to point to Donald Trump. It's a lot of, like I've emphasized before, in so many ways, Donald Trump is a continuation of the policies that we had before. It's not like he represents, a complete break from the past. No, there's a lot of continuity between, himself and Biden and previous presidents. But he has, partly just his style, but then also, on top of everything that they did, he's been imposing these tariffs, around the world on friends and allies. That's the difference. And so all of those have engendered, there was already irritation with the United States, a growing discontent, no question about it. But that irritation has really, become rage in so many cases, just because of the way that Donald Trump goes about it and the way he speaks. He's just, he doesn't try to, wear the velvet glove. He enjoys, the using the chainmailed fist. um, he's just quite, he's blatant. He kind of revels in being the hegemon, in a way that's just much too obvious to the rest of the world. We've been the hegemon for quite a long time, no question about it. But there was this pretense that there was this rules-based international order. Of course, it really was. We make the rules, and we give the orders. That's what it was all about. But there was a pretense that there was something, some sort of system of justice that we were supporting. And Trump doesn't, he just doesn't do that. He doesn't pay any lip service to that. He just issues the orders, in the most brutal kind of fashion, and the world sees it, and they don't like it. That we got very, very strong reactions. Again, like from Modi in India and Lula in Brazil, and so. Yeah, no, I think we're most definitely, paying the price. That our soft power which was really a very, very important part of what allowed us to, maintain that position as the global hegemon. That soft power is just is vanishing before our eyes, and it's going to be much, much more difficult, to maintain that position without that very important pillar.
Right. I think the soft power really underpins everything else, including a lot of your military power. I mean, if people don't want to support what your country's doing or finds it immoral, doesn't have a righteous position, I think you lose a lot of military strength as well. And militarily, we know that we are becoming more and more outdated. But it sounds like our politicians, we can't accept that. We can't accept the reality that we live in now. And you think that most probably we are going to see some type of military action in Venezuela.
Yeah.
I think if it happens, it's going to end disastrously, would you say, for the United States? Is that what you're predicting?
Definitely, in one way or another. Maybe in like a purely military terms, it might seem, at least in the short term, to be successful. That's a possibility. That's not what I'm hoping for, but that's a possibility. Maybe there's a successful decapitation strike. Maybe Venezuela, at least for the short term, is plunged into chaos. Maybe none of our ships are hit, and we don't suffer any casualties. We just make these standoff strikes, and that could happen. But even if there is a short-term military success, there's going to be an immediate, reaction throughout Latin America. Again, there are a lot of governments in Latin America are not sympathetic to Maduro and his government. Lula is a prime example. For example, Venezuela actually wanted to join the BRICS, and Venezuela has good relations, I think, in particular with Russia, but Brazil vetoed it. They did not want Venezuela in. But if we go after, again, it's so clearly unjustified. We haven't even done the proper, kind of propaganda preparation, that usually that prepares, that precedes these kind of attacks. There's usually a kind of a public relations media buildup, and this just came out of the blue, and
Right.
this absurd claim that this was all about drugs, and anybody who knows about drugs and drug smuggling knows that Venezuela is like probably the least important country, the least guilty country, within Latin America in that regard. So the whole thing was just absurd. I think everybody sees it for what it is, except for some, except for some, Trump supporters in this country that are just going to believe anything that the man says. But throughout
There's a
Latin
lot of
America,
them.
what?
There's a lot of them.
Yeah,
I see
right.
it on X. There, I mean,
Right.
people were pumped.
Yeah,
there were a
yeah.
lot of people that were
Yeah,
pumped
well,
about
unfortunately,
this.
that's the thing. It's like I was saying with this, like a strike on the nuclear facilities in Iran was very, very popular with his base. With something like 90% of Republicans were for it. We pointed out those principled Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey, but they were really an exception, unfortunately. Tucker Carlson and so forth. Unfortunately, these kind of things can be very popular. And so if he just rains bombs and missiles on Venezuela, he kills Maduro, he sinks some more speedboats, and then none of our ships suffer, and then he steams away. It'll be a total disaster, but you'll have people in this country, celebrating. Unfortunately, it may even give him a boost in his ratings at home. But looking at the medium, well, actually, immediately it's going to have a negative impact throughout Latin America. I just can't believe that it won't. Again, Latin America has a history. They're very sensitive to, U.S. meddling. They have a very vivid memories of U.S. colonialism in the area, and this is going to to bring it all back. And I think it'll be difficult for those countries that have actually tried to, which are very much aligned with the U.S. Well, that relationship is going to be put under a lot of stress. Let's say if this is what he ends up doing, if he actually does attack Venezuela, and yeah, just this is going to have long-term consequences without a doubt throughout the Americas.
Yeah, it's crazy. I just don't understand the logic when we are bogged down in Ukraine. We have this ongoing horrific genocide in Gaza. We have this war that's just on pause with Iran, and then you're like, what should we do? Let's start a war with Venezuela. I just don't understand why. I mean, the only thing that kind of makes sense to me is that Trump just needs a win.
Yeah.
And so he thinks he can get a win easily here and declare victory and then focus on the next conflict, which would be, I don't know, Iran, I assume, but
well, it might, I hate to say this, but it might actually be a smart political move for Donald Trump himself. Again, it's certainly going to be detrimental to long-term relations between the U.S. and Latin America. No question about it. It's a very foolish move from the perspectives of the interest of our country. And then, of course, it's going to further diminish our soft power, all that, completely unjustified, completely wrong, in the end, just stupid. But even though it's all those things, it's very, very stupid. It would be very stupid if he does it. He might. I think, in fact, he could very well, if he pulls it off in that way, if he doesn't get too deeply involved, if he just lets the missiles fly and we get a lot of footage of things blowing up and then, maybe including another couple of speedboats or something, and then our valiant Navy can steam away and Donald Trump can declare victory and, his base will be pumped and, I hate to say that, but that could actually happen. Again, just in the short run. Again, when we look at the long-term geopolitical situation, it's just going to be another part of the decline of the U.S., another chapter in that decline. But
Yeah.
if you look at it like at least for the next year or something for Donald Trump, it may be a plus, and maybe that's the way he's looking at it. He's having trouble, in all these other spots around the world. Again, it's just like he realizes, okay, like I've said, he can't push Russia around, he can't push China around, he can't push India around. Even the Brazilians, he can't push them around, but he can find a little country in his own hemisphere and blow up a lot of buildings and kill a lot of people there, and demonstrate that the U.S. is still number one.
Well, maybe.
I know what I mean.
We'll see.
Yeah, just to his base.
I know, but
it's
I
actually quite the opposite. I think the rest of the world would say that, just shake their heads and say, "What's happened to this country?" They would see it further evidence of the decline of the U.S.
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's unlikely that we'll be able to just bomb it and kill Maduro and just get away and have a regime change and just nothing happens to our ships or anything. I just feel like we're in a new era and there is going to be some surprises that we're not aware of. These underwater drones or something. Maybe they have one of these and it could cause some real damage. Don't know. Right, because we just we saw the Houthis who scared us in the Red Sea. We had to get out of there. So I don't know. It just seems like such a crazy thing. But I think you're right. They're laying the groundwork for it. I am surprised that there isn't a lot of prep for the American people, like you said. It's just coming out of nowhere. Like if we were going to talk about the war on drugs and we go after some countries, you think you would talk about Colombia or Mexico or Ecuador or one of these, and then just Venezuela, and everyone's like, that's a Latin American sound name. They're all the same, right? And I think that's kind of what's working on a lot of people. But there's one thing I saw that makes me feel like, yeah, we're definitely going to war. Is I saw that the U.S. Department of Defense has now been renamed the U.S. Department of War, and now the Department of War's official X account posted this video yesterday or the day before yesterday, and I'm going to show it to you and just we can talk about it.
We won World War I, and we won World War II, not with the Department of Defense, but with a War Department.
We're focusing our military on its core mission, crushing America's adversaries.
We're in the business of war fighting.
Yeah.
Are you pumped?
No, but I can see how that actually could work with a lot of people. On one level, there's sort of like your sub-rational level. You respond to it and you think, yeah, but I understand this is nutty. This is, what are we doing? Actually, that name change, as a lot of people have said, it is honest. There's very little defense in our military act. There has been very little defense, and anything that the so-called Department of Defense has done for the last several decades, it really has been a Department of War. So it is a name change that reflects the reality of this institution. So, to that extent, I don't oppose the name change. However, it is disturbing, when you look at it in conjunction with, the buildup to Venezuela. And then there's also this talk about sending the troops into Chicago. And I know that Trump had a tweet, a True Social post in which he's... Yeah. Probably all the viewers have seen it too. But again, he says, hey, Chicago, basically, look out. We're now the Department of War. And say, what? You're talking. This is actually,
right.
One of your own cities.
It was from I forget what movie, a Vietnam War movie where
Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now, right? Like I love the smell of napalm in the mornings. Like I love the smell of deportations in the morning.
Right, correct.
Right, and it's just like we're coming into Chicago, and Donald Trump with his aviators looking badass. Is what it's just. It's a lot of this sort of fifth grade mentality. It's what is cool and appeals to your 12-year-old boy. And it's like that. That's what it is, but. when I saw that video, after I saw it, I was just like, okay, we're definitely going to war, right? This is what it is. This video is to get Americans excited about the prospect of war. Yeah, let's go kick some ass. That's what this is. So I just feel like, that's where we're headed. So much for the peace candidate. He's to me, it seems like he's full on. Like we gotta fight our way out of this somehow and stay on top as the global hegemon. Is that how you're reading it?
Yeah. No, I think again, in a way, I think it's true that Donald Trump doesn't like wars. He does, I think he loves military missions. He lives in Hollywood, where it's just like a few heroic guys in aviator glasses. They take out the evil so and so somewhere, and mission accomplished, and the flag waves, and there's the rousing soundtrack and all that. I think he lives in that world, and you can see it, in these trailers and these memes, and we saw it again with the attack on the nuclear facilities. I think he took a great deal of pleasure, and it was very, very popular again, especially with his base. So I think that's what we're probably seeing. That's what he intends anyway, is to do something quick, just have a lot of create a lot of footage of explosions and of screeching aircraft and the missiles flying overhead, and then he can declare mission accomplished, and then hopefully in his mind it's all over. He's done it. He's taken out the bad guy. He's the hero, and that's it. I think it's true that he does have a real aversion to real wars. And maybe he can pull it off, but if he sends like the Marines, 4,000 Marines into Venezuela, he may be in for a nasty surprise. We'll see.
Yeah, I guess right now it's just all speculation. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about Venezuela, or we can move on.
Yeah, maybe I just add, just again some perspective, just to emphasize like how unjustified this would be. It would be unjustified in any case, but. To target Venezuela as a nest of drug smugglers, and the regime is somehow a narco terrorist regime is absurd. That's something like well over 80%, 90% of, for example, all of the cocoa that's grown is grown in the countries of Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru. And then 70% of it is exported through Ecuador. I mean, it's just, but the thing is that we have actually some pretty close ties with Colombia and very much with Ecuador. And so they're just not convenient to go after them. Yeah, it's just, Venezuela is just not, I'm sure there's some drug smuggling there. There just has to be, like there is in any country, including our own. But it's a bit player in the region. And everybody who knows anything about it, about drug smuggling and drug enforcement efforts, knows that Venezuela is not a major player, and this is the one that we've gone after. The thing is just so absurd on the face of it, but he's just depending on the ignorance of many people and the complicity of much of the media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this isn't going to go the way I think we expect it to go, or Trump expects it to go. We always have this saying, the FAFO, and I just keep on seeing these American bros saying that, but it's America's turn. We're going to F around and find out. It's going to happen eventually. We just keep on, seems like we get away with it. We just watch it on our TVs, and there's nothing that happens. But one of these days, they're going to sink one of our ships. They're going to do something horrible, kill lots of our men, and then why were we there in the first place? Now what are we going to do? Now we have to more of us have to die for what? It's just it's just so crazy how we can get involved in these conflicts when there's no reason for us to be there. We're looking to make an excuse to attack somebody or to invade. It's just so crazy. It's just hard to believe how we can do this in today's age when everybody can see it and say like, why are you just running around and attacking this? Why did you blow up that boat? Now you're going to invade this country. It just,
yeah. Again,
Anyways,
we do have those kind of episodes in our past. The U.S. does have a history of this. This is just taken to such an extreme. Let's not forget the invasion and the of Panama and the overthrow of Manuel Noriega under George H.W. Bush. But that, in comparison, it was actually condemned by the vast majority of the nations of the world when the U.S. did that. But in fact, Manuel Noriega was a major drug player. That Panama had become a drug hub, sort of similar to what Ecuador is now. So there was some logic to it. Let's just put it that way. But there was, it was the same kind of thing. It was just like, okay, drugs were becoming a more obvious problem with the U.S., and then the U.S. president decided to do something dramatic about it, in a way that Americans like, that involved sending in the Marines and blowing things up and that kind of thing. In the end, it didn't make any difference. The drug problem didn't go away, but Bush Sr. did get a boost in the polls and so on. So, we do have precedents, but this is a real extreme example, where there was some kind of justification, some logic to what Bush Sr. did. There's just no logic here.